This segment was going to be originally after the weekend. You know, it's Monday, we're jumping back in. One of the stories we did not really get to cover in detail was Mike Johnson's new claim about Donald Trump being an FBI informant whose job it was to take down Jeffrey Epstein from the inside, right? This information drop, whatever you want to call it, this is the first time Mike Johnson has ever mentioned this publicly. I've never seen him say this before. I've never seen this be a big talking point that's been pushed by Republicans before at this point. Like, oh, Trump was an informant working with the FBI to take down Epstein, actually. Now, this, while on its face, could give an excuse for why Donald Trump had a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, as more information comes out of him having a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, this still leaves a bunch of questions. Number one, how did Donald Trump get in close with Jeffrey Epstein? Number two, exactly when did he become an FBI informant? Because if the pattern is that Donald Trump was just walking down the street one day and the FBI approached him and said, "Hello, sir, with no ties to Jeffrey Epstein. We would like you to become friends with Jeffrey Epstein because of your general demeanor as a as a creepy guy. You can really get in close with him." I don't know exactly how that would work. What I would imagine is if he was an FBI informant, he had to have been previously close to Jeffrey Epstein, and then they approached Donald Trump, either because he was close and they thought he would be useful and Trump wanted to cooperate through the goodness of his heart, or that he was caught up in something and, you know, he flipped somebody. I don't know what it could possibly. I honestly have no clue. At this point, all we're now being dropped on with no extra information is boom, FBI informant. How he became an FBI informant, how he became close to Jeffrey Epstein, the motivations behind him becoming an FBI informant, whether or not he knew about Jeffrey Epstein's bad behavior before the FBI approached him. If he approached the FBI, that would be something that would make Donald Trump look exponentially fantastic. Which is why I don't think it's true, because he would have released that information by this point if it was. But, you know, who knows? Either way, huge grenade just dropped by Mike Johnson. And I think maybe he thought this was going to be the pivot. It's like, oh, finally, you know, here's an answer. You guys wanted a scoop, here's your scoop. But it just left more questions like the ones I just left. And it's being asked by people on the Hill, including the black sheep in the Republican Party right now, Thomas Massie, who is getting the lion's share of the backlash for the progressing discharge petition, which has garnered 216 signatures, every single Democrat, along with a few Republicans, which include Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. But they still need two more Republicans. Now, those last two Republicans getting on this discharge petition, which is a way to go around the Speaker of the House, who is not pushing an initiative to actually release the Jeffrey Epstein files, I don't see how they're going to cross those last two votes. It's not that nobody else in the Republican Party hasn't talked a big game about Jeffrey Epstein, like, for example, Paula Ann Luna. But at the end of the day, do I think they're going to buck Trump? They see right now that there's like $1.6 million worth of ads being spent against Thomas Massie in his district, and Thomas Massie only had like $400,000 to respond with. And they're going in there and they're saying, oh, why is Thomas Massie voting with the radical left? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. What happened to MAGA Massie? I thought he was with the president. Why is he engaging in this personal attack on the president? And he's just trying to release these ads to respond like, I'm still the same guy who owns the chickens on the farm, and I still am just like the rest of you. So whether or not his brand locally is going to hold, I have no clue. Okay, I'm not on the ground in Massie's district, but it shows, if nothing else, that the Trump administration wants to send a public signal that if you go out there and if you push to get this information out into the public, you will get very public dressing downs, and you will get resources put against you, resources that could have instead been saved to be spent in the midterms. They're instead spending on Thomas Massie. So they're showing that punishing him is a priority. Punishing those who step out of line is a priority here. Here's Thomas Massie's response to what the speaker dropped in his it would be a bombshell in and of itself, but that's just one thing. Hey, Crazy Joker, thanks for the primer. Here is Thomas Massie.
Begin with you and get your response to Speaker Johnson right there. He says you've been misled. He also suggested at one point this week, seemed to suggest that President Trump was an informant to the FBI about Jeffrey Epstein. Your reaction?
Well, they haven't been misled, and the Speaker's point that the victim's safety is compromised or privacy is false, because when we asked the survivors at our event, did they support the legislation that Ro Khanna and I have introduced, they all said yes. Now, I don't know if the Speaker misspoke.
Gotta say the safety of the victims thing is really rich. Again, many of the victims already come out, asked for the files to be released. It would not be difficult for somebody to redact the names of the victims and try to redact information that could disclose their identities. But many of their identities have already been made public by the victims themselves, requesting for the files to be made public.
When he said that Donald Trump was an informant, the lawyers for the victim said that Donald Trump had been helpful in 2009 in their case by giving them information. But being an informant implies some formal connection and ongoing relationship with the FBI. I don't know what that's all about. I think the Speaker needs to clarify that. And if it's a hoax, why was Donald Trump an informant to a hoax?
Congressman, can I begin with you?
All fantastic questions. Of course, the hoax thing is just something you can bring out any time of the week because Trump keeps saying it. It's ridiculous. It's just for a way for members of his base to try to dismiss it. But this is something that's been covered already so widely in the base, it's kind of impossible. And so when he says, oh, it's a hoax, and the victims are on the steps of the Capitol saying, please, it's not a hoax, get us justice, it's just not working. It's not making it go away, which is what he wants. And it just got worse, much worse for the Trump administration, because a slew of Epstein documents have been turned over by the Epstein estate, including
Scott Bessent is a real scrapper in the WH. First it was Elon who he punched in the face, and now Bill Pulte. Bessent wanted to punch him in the face too. Schoolyard fanatics.
Yes, I did see that. I did see the story about the Treasury Secretary of Donald Trump, Secretary Bessent, threatening to punch Bill Pulte, a rising official in the Trump administration who's mainly gotten attention for wanting to go after people on the Fed board and going after them for real estate crimes. Something that, I mean, is you would expect would be happening on the Republican side and Democrat side, but it's only being weaponized against Democrats and only being weaponized against those who are standing in front of the president's agenda. The president's very open about the fact that he feels that the DOJ is his personal arm. He's using it to defend himself in a case that he's trying to take to the Supreme Court of the $83 million decision against him and the sexual assault lawsuit and the defamation suit that he lost not only in the courts once, but then lost in appeals. We see him using it to go after Adam Schiff. We see the raids of John Bolton's home. We see him talking about investigations into the election security officials from the first administration and cybersecurity officials from his first administration who said after the election that it was free, it was fair, and it was safe, which he then wanted to launch investigations into because he thought it pushed against his stolen election narrative. So he feels very open about the fact that he can use the DOJ in this way. So I think that this guy, adding himself to the mix, this Pulte fella, has got his stock shooting up in MAGA world. And apparently the rumor was that in this bar called the Chief Executive, Pulte said something along the lines of something negative to the president. And then now I have no clue if it's true. I don't know if Secretary Bessent knows it's true. Either way, Secretary Bessent confronts him. The reports say that the dude's kind of confused at the confrontation in this chief executive bar, which was partially founded by Donald Trump Jr. It's like a bar for the MAGA elite. And eventually they get into a bit of a, shouting match until Secretary Bessent threatens to punch him in the fucking face, is the direct quote, I believe. This is the second shouting match, almost physical altercation Secretary Bessent has had in the Trump administration. First with Elon Musk, as the donor was talking about, and now with Bill Pulte, a rising figure in the Trump administration who is helping the Trump administration weaponize the Department of Justice. Interesting stuff, though, isn't it? But you gotta wonder, all of that for what? All of that, you're a grown man in one of these like bar. It's like if he said I banged your wife or something to your face, and he slapped him or he punched him, it's like, okay, in a moment of rage. But the idea that he was speaking rumors to the president, so you need to go confront him in the bar. How dare you? I'll punch you. This is King's Court's politics. This is what happens when it's all just based on like the ebbs and flows of just Trump's like momentary like gaze and opinion of you. Your stock may rise and fall in a moment. You have to battle in court for his attention. Many people say that the shouting matches that end up happening in Trump cabinet meetings is by design by Trump, that he wants his people to fight against each other. So they're busy scuffling with each other. They're never going to even think about scuffling or doing anything to undermine him, and their constant motivation is to do things to garner his approval so he can beat out other people and climb the ranks, either so they can get an endorsement in 2028, either so they can get closer into his personal political circle, so they can have more power in the administration to make decisions and guide the administration in whatever way they want. Because many of these people see Trump, I mean, not only as like a political device in and of itself, but also as the device for them to use for their means, whatever they believe in. Be it if you're Elbridge Colby or Secretary Noem. Anyway, the situation for Trump has gotten markedly worse as the Epstein estate had to turn over a slew of documents, including one that Trump previously expressed just was not real. And not only he expressed it wasn't real, JD Vance went out on social media and crusaded against it, said it was a outright fabrication, that it was scandalous, that it was this destroys the credibility of the news organizations reporting on it, that it was a insult to report. It was all this horrible stuff. And he went on the circuit onto all these shows to say it wasn't true. And now we're getting the slew of documents, including the one that Trump previously said did not exist. Let's hear about the documents being turned over, and then we'll take a look at Trump's infamous body letter, we'll call it.
Now, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, and former federal prosecutor Temadayo Agenga-Williams. He was also senior investigative counsel for the January 6th Select Committee. Julie, lawmakers have asked for a slew of evidence related to the Epstein case. So where do their efforts stand going into this week?
Yeah, and specifically, we're talking about on the lawmakers on the House Oversight Committee, because I know there are parallel efforts going on with that separate discharge petition to try and force the Department of Justice to release these files. But essentially, what's going to happen today, we expect, according to a source familiar, that the House Oversight Committee will begin to receive redacted versions of certain documents subpoenaed by James Comer, the Republican chair of the committee. You see them there on your screen. Specifically, what they're hoping to see is that so-called birthday book, the one in which, apparently, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, Donald Trump then in 2003 essentially wrote and drew a doodle for Epstein. Democrats on the committee are keeping their eyes peeled to see if that is ultimately included in what is turned over by the estate today, which they expect it to be. Also, phone logs, flight logs, anywhere they could potentially see any connections with who Epstein was in contact with, who his associates were, a bigger breadth than what we already knew over the last 2 decades. And certainly there's a lot more to be seen. Remember, this is going to be redacted. It's going to take time for them to go over this stuff. And certainly for Democrats, at least, there is some skepticism that they might not be able to trust what the estate is turning over.
And so, Julie.
Now, who knows what the estate's ultimately going to turn over, if they're going to turn over everything. I mean, this is Epstein's estate, obviously. What's going to be redacted, what isn't going to be redacted. But one piece of information that the Wall Street Journal is reporting on is the birthday letter with Trump, which includes the letter itself. Lawyers for Jeffrey Epstein's estate has given Congress a copy of the birthday book put together for the financier's 50th birthday, which includes a letter with President Trump's signature that he said does not exist. This was revealed today by members of the House Oversight Committee. Now, this is something that could not have been hidden by the Republicans on the committee, purely for the fact that not only would, if they tried to hide it past this point, it would be horribly embarrassing for not only the Trump administration, but those on the committee, but also because, of course, tons of Democrats on the committee And there's nothing they could do. It's now all public review. There's nothing they could have done at this point. Once those documents were turned over, there's nothing they could have done. There's nothing they could have done to block it. Before, when it comes to Mike Johnson and the rest of Republican leadership shutting down Congress to stop a vote on the Epstein files being released, that's something they could have done to stop its release, and that's what they did do. When it comes to this discharge petition, they just need 2 more Republicans to sign on to jump on the vote in order to get it through. They will not do that. I don't think they're going to be able to make the vote. I think that they're going to miss it by at least a vote, but I wouldn't be surprised if literally no one else jumped on out of fear after seeing the ad money that's being spent against Thomas Massie in his home district after the Trump administration called what he did a hostile act. But at the end of the day, the only real transparency we've gotten on the Epstein files since Trump has gotten in office, after he promised transparency, after Kash Patel, his FBI director, promised transparency, said he'd release the complete raw footage on Joe Rogan's podcast, unedited, did none of that, failed in all of that. And since then, Pam Bondi to Dan Bongino, it's been a massive disaster. From Dan Bongino's protests, from Pam Bondi's statements in the affirmative, then in the negative, then in the affirmative. And now we have the first piece of actual transparency we've gotten for the entirety of the administration on Jeffrey Epstein, the release of some actual files. And it's not due to the Republicans in Congress acting. It's due to these documents being turned over. Listen to this. There must be more to life than everything. This is, and by the way it was described in the article is the way that it's drawn. If you look here, it's drawn in the body of a woman, breasts. If you go down below, the writing is where you would expect the pubic hair to be. Some could say that it's not artistically meant to be that it's just kind of happens to be there, that he signed the signature. But I mean, the thing about art is the interpretation lies in the eyes of the beholder. So I'll leave that to you, art fanatics at home, to interpret what the artist's meaning truly was. All you Bob Rosses around there who are going to be copying this masterpiece at home. Let's read what was in here, even though, again, we already read the report a while ago, though it was denied at the time. Voiceover, and that's what's weird about this. It's a voiceover. It's not like, hey, Jeffrey, how's it doing? Hope you have a good day. Hot women, haha, Donald. That would be normal. That's not, you know what? I can't believe I said that out loud. That would not be normal. Compared to this, that would be normal. In these circumstances, relative to the fact that he's friends with Jeffrey Epstein, that would be normal. That's what I would expect of Donald Trump. What I would expect of Donald Trump, if he was to be the type of, in the most sympathetic picture you could paint of Donald Trump, is that he's a womanizing type of guy, that, he was married to his wife, he boinked a porn star, paid her off all this money while his wife was pregnant. And that's just the type of way he behaves. He saw Jeffrey as the type of guy who does something similar. And, he invited him to some parties and stuff like that. Later found stuff out. And then, but didn't engage in anything. That's the most sympathetic picture you could paint. It doesn't really match up with the fact that he said that Jeffrey likes his women on the younger side. And it certainly doesn't match up with the recent declaration by Mike Johnson that he was an FBI informant. But when you read stuff like this, and it's not like a normal letter, I don't know how you guys write a letter to your friends. How's it going? Hope you've been well. Happy birthday. Boom. Voice over. And listen to the ominous way that this reads. There must be more to life than everything. Donald. Yes, there is, but I won't tell you what it is. Jeffrey. Nor will I, since I also know what it is. Donald. We have certain things in common, Jeffrey. Jeffrey. Yes, we do, come to think of it. Donald. Enigmas never age. Have you noticed that? Jeffrey. As a matter of fact, it was clear to me the last time I saw you. Donald. A pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret. Donald J. Trump. Pubic hair. That's my interpretation. So, this is word for word what was in the article. So Donald Trump, okay, brace for it, brace for it, brace for it, brace for it, brace for it. He lied. He lied. He fibbed. Okay? Now, once you have gotten over the shock, we also need to include that the vice president did as well. And the vice president was the one who was really doing the circuit, going around saying that it wasn't real. Here's my question. Did the vice president know it was fake? Or at least think it was fake? And then went out there and started saying it was fake after being tricked? Or did he know and he was just following orders? Because I would not be surprised if JD Vance thought it was fake, thought the fake news was fake newsing or whatever, went out there, said, that's too crazy to believe. And Donald Trump said, yeah, I know. Yeah. And so he went out there and he did the circuit for him. Either way, the people this blew up in the face of most is Donald Trump, obviously, who himself denied it. But I would say to a lesser extent, but I think almost equal, is JD Vance, because he was the man I saw out there on Twitter really digging the trenches, going bar for bar, word for word, fighting in the replies with people on Twitter. The vice president of the United States in the replies going back and forth so viciously. See, if you thought this was real, but you had to portray it like it was fake, you know what you do? You release like I would imagine you release like a single statement and then you don't follow up on it at all, because the more scrutiny you get, the worse it's going to be, right? That's one way to approach it. But again, a Trumpian lying tactic has always been if you repeat a lie enough times. But now that it's out there, whether it was a Trumpian lying tactic, whether it was an example of Donald Trump using JD Vance as his political footstool, and now JD Vance has to pay some political consequence from that on one of the few issues that is most painful for the MAGA base when it comes to dealing with Trump. Mind you, when you poll Republican voters, because people, I remember talking to Jeb Tan not too long ago. We just released the full footage on YouTube of the conversation where he's like, don't worry, I'm actually happy Trump won this time because now MAGAism will be dead because the Epstein stuff and XYZ, it's really pissing people off. Polling indicates that the approval rating for Donald Trump for Republicans, people in the Republican Party, which the majority of the MAGA movement is within, but there's also people who are independents and maybe even libertarians that would be covered by that label. 90% in February of this year. Now it's 91%. Okay, if you think I'm lying, I'm pushing Trump propaganda, go listen to Harry Enton on CNN or whoever you need to tell you this. But that's just how it is. Now, whether or not with time, as certain promises on the economy don't bear fruit, with time, as certain promises when it comes to a quick and speedy end to the war in Ukraine continue to not bear fruit, or if the war in Gaza continues to drag on, or if we have more incidences, maybe that will change, but I don't see it changing of a grand scale anytime soon. I could see it moving within 10 digits max, but this idea of some great collapse that was being described to me, no. I think that if Democrats win the midterm, it's going to be by an incredibly slim margin, despite the stuff coming out here. I don't think it's going to be by a massive margin. Hopefully, I mean, obviously, I am not a fan of the president. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully it's a much bigger margin, but I think it's going to be quite slim because there has been a bubbleification of people's media input where people get their sources of information from just a few things, from just a few places, and to accept some pieces of information is to have to restructure their beliefs in such a way that is really painful. Really, really painful. To accept that Donald Trump isn't the one draining the swamp, but he is a swamp creature himself, kind of really refocuses a lot of your votes for him the last few years. Or it's going to, really undermine a lot what you've based your identity on. If you've really been like, on Truth Social or any of these other places. Now, that's not to say that every Republican or registered Republican is like that, but those people are going to be, you're never going to win them over in the short term. In the long term, who knows, but you're never going to win them over in the short term, certainly not within midterm or any, I don't even think 2028. It's those people in the margins. It's like, when I want my taxes lower, that you might be able to move on stuff. And nothing has moved them yet. Even with higher grocery prices, even with the bad unemployment numbers, even with the recent stagnation and the problems with trade and the problems with tariffs and America's turning their back on tariffs, even with his losing numbers on the economy. Independents, not a fan. Hispanics since the election have kind of turned on him. Definitely young people have turned on him. But when it comes to the Republican Party itself, it hasn't. And so I think losing margins with the groups that he made gains with in 2024 will hurt him in the midterms, and it might hurt him enough, especially if Democrats are energized and turn out to win the House. I'm not saying that's impossible, but I think that this dream that one day we're going to get this document where Donald Trump says, Jeffrey, we're friends. We're best friends. Let's take a blood pact in the cave. I don't think that even if that document comes out, that it's going to move more than a few, like, honestly, when I say single digits, that's actually pushing too much, because that could emphasize like 9% of Republicans. I would be surprised if more than 5% of Republicans were moved to a point of either not voting or not or voting in the other way. I think it would have to be a cavalcade of other issues crashing down. It would have to be much more welling up in that dam than the principle of the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. The economy, that probably is going to add a lot of water to the dam. One last thing, though, I wanted to show is Representative Massie talking about why he thinks Donald Trump has been resisting the release of these files so much, though, because while I'm saying is true that I don't think it's going to move a ton of Republicans, it can turn centrists against him. It does change out the vibe, and it can discourage voter turnout, where somebody might still prefer Trump over the other person, but, you know, they're not going to go and canvass as much this time. They're not going to go and door knock as much this time. Or maybe for some people, they might be like, yeah, Trump's better than the other person. I'm not going to go vote for him out this time. That type of stuff, where people don't flip, but they get discouraged, they put less in, that is probably a bigger threat. But right now, I mean, RNC fundraising numbers is well outpassing Ken Martin's DNC by leaps and bounds.
Why do you think, Congressman Massie, the president is resisting the release?
I think it's going to be embarrassing to some of the billionaires, some of the donors who are politically connected to his campaign. I also think Democrats are going to be implicated in this, Democrat donors. And when you get to the billionaire level, a lot of these folks give to both parties anyway. There are probably intelligence ties to our CIA and maybe to other foreign intelligence, and the American people would be shocked, I think, to know that our intelligence agency was working with a pedophile who was running a sex trafficking ring. So these are the reasons I think that they're resisting this. But we can't avoid justice just to avoid embarrassments for some very powerful men.
Again, the excuses for not releasing this so far, the protection of the identities of the Epstein victims that are on the steps of the Capitol is telling you to release the files, right? The defense against this is that it's a hostile act against the administration, which you would only view as a hostile act if you think the president is directly implicated in the files and you're uncomfortable with the country knowing if the president is either friendly with the diddler and how friendly he was, or engaged in some of those activities themselves. Both bad, one obviously worse, and might have more transformative implications if confirmed. But I mean, either way, I mean, if it's not true, you would want this information to get out there so we could be like, oh, sigh of relief, our president did not. But I think there's also some truth to what he's saying, that even if it's not Trump implicated, even though it seems that he was quite friendly with the man, there could be other people around him that could be implicated. There's no good excuse for releasing this outside of self-preservation for Donald Trump. And even then, people will always remember, people will always recall, maybe not in the moment, but upon suggestion, upon utterance, once they hear that Jeffrey Epstein and they remembered, oh yeah, he didn't want those files released, I mean, this was so public, this fight against the files being released. So yes, it could file him around forever, but the more files like that get released tying Trump to Epstein, the worse it's going to be. And so on principle, there's no good reason to stop the release of these files. It's only right now to just see how much of Trump's relationship with Epstein can be covered up. This has been known for a while, but now we just have the paper confirmation of it. The president is lying about the documents that has been previously reported. The president's a liar. My goodness. Who would have thought? Again, I'm in deep shock. I believe the moral aptitude of the president of the United States is questionable.